Hey guys, it's John with CheatSheetPros.com, and we're going to take a look at some NFL player props and prize picks for Week 9 on Halloween weekend. I'm going to go over, anywhere from 15 to 20 in the YouTube video. The article has my favorite 8 to 9, so I like to give people some bonus content. When we go over these, we're going to go over the recent game logs. We're going to take a look at it, and so think of what you think a fair line would be if you don't know it, and then at the end of the player, I'll tell you what the line is and we can decide if that's good or bad. So we're also going to use the NFL cheat sheet. Some of the items we're going to look at on here are the yards allowed by the opponent team, rushing, passing, how the opponent defenses does versus wide receiver ones, tight ends, running backs, my favorite stat, allowed yards per rush attempts, and then again, just up here, the total defense, rushing, passing. So let's go ahead and get started. So for rushing yards, Jonathan Taylor, the last 4 weeks, has 103, 53, 145, and 107. Anywhere from 15 to 18 attempts, has a touchdown in 4 straight games. So five touchdowns in the last 4 games. So he's been doing phenomenally. Now, he is playing at home this week, so that's a bonus, and he's going up against Tennessee. Now, Tennessee is only allowing 103.9 rush yards per game, but that's mainly because everybody's throwing against them. They do have a decent rush defense, but they're still giving up 4.5 yards per rush attempt, and that ranks 25th in the NFL, so I like Jonathan Taylor to go over. Now, what do we think a good line is for Taylor? With 107, 145, 53, 93, I would guess 90, maybe 85.5 would be a line I would kind of put it on. It's a decent matchup. Maybe 80 would be a low number. Well, looking at prize picks this morning, it's Thursday, October 28th. It's article and video day. His line is 67.5. So with him giving up 4.5 yards per attempt in a close game, I like Jonathan Taylor to go over 67.5 rush yards, and he's been over that in 3 of the last 4, easily over it. My next favorite rushing yard prop is Ezekiel Elliott. Guy's been on fire. We don't know if Dak's going to be available yet or not. I'm assuming he plays, but not for sure. So we got Dallas at Minnesota. So we're going to look for Minnesota on here. And there they are. So Dallas, Minnesota, this is going to be the later game. And let me see, Minnesota is allowing the 26th most rush yards per game at 128. And then per rush attempt, they're giving up 4.8 yards per rush attempt, which ranks 29th in the NFL. So this sets up as a good spot for Zeke. His raw projection over here, you can see, is 84.1 rushing yards. I don't really use projections a lot, but that just gives you kind of an idea of what they're looking at. In recent games, he had 69, 110, 143, 93, and 71 over the last 5. So he's been over 95 in 3 of the last 4 and 69 last week in a tough game against New England. But look what he did through the air, 7 of 9 for 50 yards. So his fantasy point prop might be something to look at. He's put up 26, 23, 28, and 19. So he's been pretty solid on that front. I'm trying to only list the player once in one category, but if I do like him in another category, I will let you know. So with his going 95, 143, 110, 70, I would guess his line to be 80 to 85.5, somewhere in that range. Looking at price picks this morning, it was 73.5. So seems a little low, so I like Ezekiel Elliott in a good matchup to go over that. I also like running backs that are getting a lot of attempts, so you can see 17, 20, 21, and 17. So he's getting a decent amount of rush attempts against a mediocre to low rush defense that's giving up a chunk per carry. Now, one of my tier 2 plays that is not in the article I wanted to look at was Leonard Fournette. So this guy has been on fire recently, and so Tampa Bay is playing New Orleans. Now, New Orleans is a tough matchup. Rush defense, they're allowing the 3rd least amount of rush yards per game at 80.8. And yards per attempt, only 3.3. So it is a tough matchup for him. But recently he's put up 81, 81, 67, 92. The 92 was against New England. Philadelphia's got a good front. He got 81. Chicago's got a good defensive front. He got 81. So he's sitting somewhere in the 70 to 90 range. So what do you think his total would be at? I don't think he would be in the 70 to 90 because the matchup is ridiculously tough but he is having games where he gets 20 to 22 carries. So I like him to break one because I can't really load the box with Tom Brady because Tom Brady will kill you over the top. So looking at this, I would guess the line to probably be 70. 70 might be high. Let's say lower than his worst game. So say 65.5. So if this line was 65.5, would you take it with 90, 67, 81, and 81 games? Well, looking at Price Picks this morning, it's 55.5, so a little lower. So the matchup is built into the line, but I think 60, 65 is probably a better number. 55.5, I like it, and I think it might go up just a hair. That's a tier 2 bet. I don't love it, but I do like it if you're looking for something on the edge. Now I want to jump over to receiving yards and some of the ones that jumped out at me. So Jalen Waddle is going up against Buffalo, which is going to be a ridiculous matchup. So Buffalo is one of the top defenses in the NFL, and this is even an early game. Yep, 1 o'clock. So Buffalo is allowing the least amount of passing yards per game at 180.5, and they rank second versus wide receiver 1s, 2s, 3s, fourth versus tight ends. So they're really not giving up much through the air at all. Now, on top of this, let's take a look. So he's put up 83, 70, 31, 33, 58, 61. So they played Buffalo in week 2. I didn't know that. So he caught 6 of 8 for 48 yards against Buffalo already this year. And Tredavius White, I don't know if they'll shadow him or not, but he's a ridiculous corner. Here he caught 12 balls, but still only 58 yards. 33, 31, so he's got a low floor, and then caught 10 balls for 70 yards, 7 balls for 83 yards, so he's really not getting a lot of yards after the catch, so to speak. And what jumped out at me is his number was 64.5 going up against Buffalo. So I think 64.5 in a neutral matchup would be a fair line, considering that this would be under, over. But Jacksonville and Atlanta don't compare to Buffalo, and he barely went over in these two, so I like him to go under 65.5 or 64.5. And last time he faced him, he only had 48. I don't like doing the fantasy points on him because he does catch a lot of balls, and Price Picks does a PPR. So I like the under yardage because, I mean, the majority of the time he's going to go under that, and Buffalo shutting him down wouldn't be a shock. One of the ones I like that is in the article that's one of my favorite plays is Kyle Pitts. So let's go ahead and take a look at him. We got Carolina at Atlanta. Atlanta is at home, so we like the teams at home. They usually tend to play a little bit better. Carolina is only giving up 197 pass yards per game, so they've been pretty good defensively. They do rank 7th against the tight end. But one thing I like about Pitts is 163 yards last week, 119 the week before. So he's really starting to break through. In these last 2 weeks, he has 16 catches, 18 targets, and pushing 300 receiving yards. So I was curious, in a tougher matchup, but not impossible, what his number would be. His number came in at 65.5, which I think is pretty fair. He would have been over here in week 2 against Tampa, and then under it, which this game he only had 2 catches, so of course he goes under. 4 catches here gets him up to 50 yards, but he had 9 targets. And then in week 5, he really started to break through with 9 catches on 10 targets for 119, and then 7 for 8 for 163. So he's starting to get some longer targets, a longer average per reception. So 65.5 could be one that he's done with by halftime. And he seemed to eclipse Calvin Ridley right now. So just one I like to pay attention to. The other one I really like is Jamar Chase. And so I have him in a couple season-long leagues, but it's a short team league that I'm really deep. And so I've benched him a couple of times, which I found out was a huge mistake. And so you got Cincinnati at the New York Jets. So Cincinnati's going on the road. So let's take a look at the Jets. So the Jets defense right here, they're giving up 275 passing yards per game. And they are 30th versus the wide receiver 1 and 20th versus the wide receiver 2. His raw projection right here is 86.3 yards. And then we come over here. Well, he had 201 yards last week, 97 yards the week before, 159 in week 5, 77 and 65. So in the since week 3, he's had at least 65 yards per game and been over 155 twice. So that's pretty good. So his receiving yard number is 88.5. So it's a little on the high side. However, with his floor being about 65 yards, he's going to be close to that, and he could absolutely crush that. With 159, 97, and 201 the last 3 weeks, I like him to go over 88.5 against a not real good Jets team. Another one you might consider, A.J. Brown. So A.J. Brown struggled. You can see here. I wish I'd quit scrolling down. Get back up there. So 3 of 9 for 43 yards, 0 for 2, 3 for 6. He's struggled with some injuries, but these last 2 weeks he's really taken off. So against Buffalo, he was 7 of 9 for 91 yards. That was extremely impressive. And then last week against Kansas City, who really don't play defense, he had 8 of 9 for 133. So 15 grabs on 18 targets, over 200 yards in the last 2 weeks. And going up in a good competitive matchup with Indy, I like him to go over his total. Now, his number is a little bit higher at 74.5, but with 91 and 133 the last 2 games, I mean, if he can continue on that pace, I think that's a good over. Again, I would consider this more of a tier 2 play and not a favorite play because of that. He does have a lower floor. Another one to look at that falls in the tier 2 category is TJ Hawkinson. So he's put up 48, 74, 22, 42, 10, 66, 97. So the first 2 games he did decent, and then he put up 10, 42, 22, 74, 48. Well, his number popped off at 52.5, and that just screams under. Now, he's getting a lot of targets, but he's not getting any separation. He's not getting down the field or, small targets, not getting a bunch of yards. Again, not my favorite play, but a decent tier 2 play for him to go under, especially yardage, 52.5. He would have been under that in 4 of the last 5. So that's one I think we can kind of lean on. And then Justin Jefferson. So this one's kind of interesting. I pay attention in season-long DFS to shadow coverage and top defenses and top corners that cover the other wide receiver 1, and then I pivot off and, play the wide receiver 2 in DFS. Well, Justin Jefferson falls into that category this week going up against Trayvon Diggs, who is having an excellent year. Now, in season long, yes, you have to play Justin Jefferson no matter what. He's too good to set down, and he could always break one off. We saw what DK Metcalf did last week. So looking at him, he's got 80, 124, 84, 118. He has been absolutely solid, but he's also played Seattle, Cleveland, Detroit, and Carolina, which those defenses have been roasted. So he's going to get shadow coverage this week and full attention from Trayvon Diggs, and his number is 87.5. So even in these matchups, he's about 50-50. So he's been under that in 3 of the last 5 weeks, under that in 2 of the last 4 weeks, and then he gets shadow coverage from Trayvon Diggs. Now, if he goes over it, I wouldn't be shocked. But again, this isn't a walkover matchup like Detroit and Seattle where he went over 100. This is going to be more like a Cleveland, Carolina where he's less than 80. So 87.5 I thought was a little high. I'm curious to see if it moves down. So that's one that I do like the under on with the shadow coverage. And then let's move on to fantasy points. I didn't really see any passing yardage props that jumped out at me this week. But I have a bunch of the fantasy point props, and the reason I like those is anyone who catches balls, they're involved in the receiving game, it gives them a boost, and then anyone who's likely to score a touchdown, it gives them another boost. So let's go ahead. I'm going to take a look at my 4 favorite, and then we're going to go down, and we're going to take 5 tier 2 looks. So James Robinson is the first one. He's going up against Seattle. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Seattle defense, they've been absolutely terrible. 30th in rush yards allowed per game at 134.1. And then yards per rush attempt, 4.2, kind of middle of the road. And against pass catching backs, they rank 31st. So he jumps on the radar. So we take a look. His fantasy point prop, let's see what he's done the last 4 weeks. He's got 19, 24.7, 20.6, 25.4. He's got a touchdown, and he's got 5 touchdowns in the last 4 games, 17 to 18 attempts in each of the last 3. He's got a floor of about 73 yards across his last 4 games, and he's getting a little work in the passing game. He had 6 catches here, or 6 targets, 2, had 4 targets last week. So he's doing decent. He's giving you a solid floor in a matchup that is fairly good for him. Well, his fantasy point number, I would have thought it'd been around 20, maybe 19. That would have kind of put it right in the mix, but it was only 16. So at 16, I like him to go over because he really only needs, if he gets, so last week he had 3 grabs for 28 yards. So let's say 3 for 30. That's 6 points right there. So he only needs to make up 10. So he could have 100 yards rushing or a touchdown and 40 yards rushing. So I like those odds for him to go over in a good matchup. The next one I like is Damien Harris. So we all knew Damien Harris was going to have a decent year, and he's going up against the Chargers, who typically the Chargers have a really good defense, but their rush defense this year has not been good. They're giving up the most rush yards per game at 162, and then yards per rush attempt, they're giving up 5.4. So they're doing good on the passing side. They're only allowing the 4th least, but they're getting killed on the ground. Well, what do you think New England's going to do? So Damien Harris's raw projection is 76.8 yards, so say about 80 yards. And then, let me see, he's put up 106, 101, and then had some struggle bus games. Last 2, he's over 100 yards each game, so I like that. 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games with 20.8 and 28.3 fantasy points. His number, what do you think his price pick fantasy point number is? So I would have guessed 15, 16, maybe 17, in a good matchup against a bad rush defense. If it was 15 to 16, that's probably where I would peg it, and I would stay away from it. And with him putting up 48 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks, I like where he's trending. His number was 12. So he only needs 12 price pick points or fantasy points to eclipse that number. So that's 60 yards and a touchdown. That's it. And if he gets a catch, he only needs 50 yards and a touchdown to go over. 2 touchdowns, he has it. So I like him. That's one of my favorite plays on the weekend that I'm probably going to have locked into one of my bigger cards. Another one is T. Higgins. So I don't have the stats pulled up on PFF, but T. Higgins had a massive amount of air yards when he returned. And then last week he had 15 targets. 15! That is insane. So he caught 7 of 15 for 62 yards, and it was only 13 fantasy points, so not very good. But his number this week for prize pick points is only 14. Well, he had 15 targets last week, so 7 catches, 62. So he needs 7 for 70, 8 for 60, anything in there. If he gets in the end zone, it's a slam dunk. Going up against the Jets, I do like it. Jamar Chase is my preferred option, but T. Higgins is getting a ton of looks, so I really like him to bounce back, and he's one of the sneakier DFS plays. The other one I really like is not Deb, but Debo Samuel. So look at his targets, 11, 9, 13, 10. I mean, he's getting a ton of targets. He's the wide receiver 1 in San Francisco. Last week he caught 7 for 100 yards and even got in the end zone, which killed me in a fantasy league. But he's got 25, 16, and 38 fantasy points over the last 3. His number this week was 16, so that's kind of his lowest in the last 3 games at 16.0. So he's been over that in 3 straight games. Going up against Chicago is a tougher matchup, but with as many looks as he's getting, I do like him to slide over. Now, real quick, I'm going to slide through and look at 5 tier 2 ones that I'm leaning on. And so one of them is... So I tried not to put these in 2 categories. I lied to you. So A.J. Brown, fantasy points over 17 is one that I like. So he has 16.1, 30.3 the last week. I didn't write my notes down on that one, so I can't remember exactly what jumped out at me. Oh, nope, I remember. Sorry, don't look at him. It was Aaron Jones. So... yeah, sorry about that. I wrote down AJ over 17 fantasy points, and I was thinking it was AJ Brown, but it's Aaron Jones. So the reason I like Aaron Jones over the 17 fantasy points is Devontae Adams is out. They have no other receivers to throw. Randall Cobb and I can't remember the other guy's name are going to be the top 2 receivers. So in games where Devontae Adams does not play, Aaron Jones usually goes bananas. And so I like him to just be involved in everything. Here we can see he's going to get 13 to up to 19 rushing attempts. And then he's also heavily involved in the passing game. Here, 5 of 5, 4 of 4, 4 of 5, 3 of 4 for 20, 34, 6, and 51 yards. and he has 17, 21, and then a week game of 9 last week. But they've priced it right at 17 fantasy points, but if you are playing the Thursday night game and you want to kick off a card, I like him to be heavily involved. And he's likely to get a touchdown, 5 grabs. So if he does 5 grabs for 30 yards, that's 8 points. If he got in the end zone, that puts you up to 14. And then he only needs 30 yards rushing to get there. And if he ends up, like this game, rushing for 100 yards, then he really doesn't need that much in the passing game to get you there. So the 100 yards and the 4 grabs is 14. So I like him with no Devontae Adams because he does not have anyone pulling away from him. Another one, fantasy points I like, is Matt Ryan. So his number, I'm going to go ahead and jump to it, is 18 fantasy points. The last 3 games, he's got 29, 25, 22.4. So he's doing really well, and he only has to go over 18. Again, not my favorite play, but a tier 2 play. I mean, 283 and 4 touchdowns, 342 and 2 touchdowns, 336 and 2 touchdowns. So I like him to go over his fantasy point total because they can't run the ball, and he's got a lot of weapons at receiver now with Calvin Ridley back, Cordarrelle Patterson, Kyle Pitts. That should be a fun one to watch. Another tier 2 play that jumps out at me is Deontay Johnson. So Deontay Johnson is a PPR monster. Now, we had a rough week here in Denver, but since then, and we know Juju's out for the year, so he's got 9 of 12, 9 of 13, 9 of 13, so 9 grabs in 3 of the last 4. So that's 9 points by itself right there with nothing else. And his fantasy point number is 16.5, so it's slightly higher than what I like, but he's put up 22, 24, 15.2, and 18. Now with his 9 grabs, he's over halfway there already, so he only needs a touchdown or about 70 yards, and he's going to get you that over. And he's someone that I really like to jump on. It is a tougher matchup against a Cleveland defense. And then one of the last ones I want to look at is Khalil Herbert. So the mix between him and Damien, I'm not really sure how it's going to break down. Everybody's leaning towards Khalil staying the lead back for now. Last week, even with Damien back, he had 18 for 100 yards. And then he caught 5 of 5 for 30 yards for 21 fantasy points. The week prior, there was no Damien, I believe, but he had 19 for 97. So he's got 5.1 and 5.6 yards per attempt in 2 games. And then he had 8 targets across these last 2 games with a touchdown. And then he got 19.2 points and 21 points. So he's actually putting up some impressive numbers. Now, San Francisco is a tougher matchup, but his fantasy point number, what do you think it is? With 19, 12, Damien back, I figured, okay, 20 is his average the last 2 games. Let's knock it down, maybe 16, 15, 15.5. It was 12.5 when I looked. So I love 12.5. If he rushes for 100 yards, I mean, he only needs 2 catches to get that number. So Khalil Herbert over 12.5 fantasy points is one of the other tier 2 bets that I like. So this is what we're leaning at for prize picks for week 8 NFL Halloween weekend. Have a good one, guys, and hopefully we'll bounce back with some more soon. Thank you.